Another important thing you may need to do is consider keystone resources in the protected areas. And you want to make sure key resources for biodiversity are protected. So things like mineral licks, bodies of water, and rocky outcrops can be really important for shelter, for water, and you can see here elephants trying to get minerals. You can also modify habitats to provide more resources. So you might be able to sustain larger populations in smaller areas. Things like this might be digging a new pond, adding nest boxes, planting food plots. But there is a fine line between having this type of management and having a garden. So you want the ecosystem to be able to function normally and continue into the future. So you don't want to have too much intervention, but if this helps you meet your goals in the short term, it might help you preserve it for the longer term. Another important aspect of protected areas is monitoring biodiversity. We need to collect data in order to evaluate different management practices and key populations or ecosystem services that we want to preserve. An important concept within this is called adaptive management. It's basically where we adjust our management practices with the continued collection of new information. Structured decision making is a formalized way of incorporating uncertainty to implement adaptive management. So if you want to do adaptive management, structured decision making is a way to do that when you don't know the exact best answer. So the idea here, this kind of shows adaptive management. So the idea here is that you evaluate your goals, you make a plan, a management plan, you design exactly how you're going to do it, you implement it, you monitor whatever important conservation outcome you're hoping to achieve. It could be ecosystem function, it could be the numbers of an endangered species. Then you decide if your plan is working or not, and then you might adjust it or adapt it based on what you see. And then you implement that, do monitoring, and then adjust as needed. So the idea is that you never have a fixed plan that you aren't going to change from. The idea is continually monitor and collect more data, and you only change your management practice when needed. So if your plan is working, you probably want to keep doing that. If your plan appears not to be working, then you want to adjust your management practices. And ideally, what you would do is have some areas that are managed with one particular technique and some others that are not managed, so you can make a robust comparison. But you need to keep monitoring and keep collecting standardized data so that you can make these robust comparisons between different types of management practice. And then as you get evidence that one management practice is working better than another, you want to put more and more land towards that particular type of management. Zoning is another important tool that we can use, and that's designating certain uses to certain areas. It can minimize conflicting demands for use of an area, and it can allow for strict preservation of particular resources in one place and sustainable use in another place. It can allow recovery of fish and game populations with long-term benefits for ecosystems and people, and the local people may be more willing to support because their sustainable use of the area is incorporated into some of the zones. So it's how if any of you are hunters or fisher, you might be allowed to fish or hunt in certain areas but not in others. And that is to balance these conflicting demands on an area. So an example here in the Philippines, large reef fish had been over-harvested, did so much that they weren't seen anymore. And so what they did was they had areas where there was an unfished reserve, and then they did these surveys to look at the density of large reef fish, and you can see here that inside the reserve the fish were rapidly increasing, but right outside of the reserve the fish were slowly increasing as well, and that's because the reserve provided a place, a refuge for those fish. One particular type of zoning is a particular type of reserve called a biosphere reserve, which has a core area that is strictly protected, a buffer zone where we might have some tourism and recreation, and then a larger transitional zone that has human settlements within it. And so this allows us to minimize edge effects and to also have strict preservation of certain populations in the core area, which has no effect of edge effects and very little impact from people. So you can see the core area, there's not even tourism or recreation, but there is monitoring going on in all of these different areas to make sure. So I will want you to know what a biosphere reserve is, and the important thing to remember is that has a core protected area and is surrounded by a buffer and transitional zone that have more use by people in them.